I discovered messages my girlfriend sent to her ex saying, "I'm just waiting until he gets his inheritance money. Then I'll finally dump this boring loser and be with you." So I placed a fake IRS notice on my desk. She left me the very next day. But her panic calls started once I posted my new house on Instagram. My name is Jack. I am 34 and I work as a transit maintenance technician in northern New Jersey. Most of my shifts are early mornings or late nights inside rail yards checking electrical systems and brake equipment on commuter trains. It is steady work and the schedule is predictable, which honestly fits my personality pretty well. I rent a small apartment in Jersey City and my routine is simple. Work, gym, groceries, then home. I am not big on social media, and I have always been the reliable, boring type of guy. My girlfriend is Maria. She is 29 and works as a dental assistant at a private clinic. We had been together a little over 3 years when all of this happened. For the last year, she had basically been living at my place, even though technically the lease is only under my name. Maria has a much louder personality than I do. She likes busy restaurants, weekend trips, and posting everything online. I am more low-key, but for a long time the difference felt balanced. One detail that becomes important later involves my grandfather. He passed away last year and left me an inheritance. The legal process around it was slow, so it had not been finalized yet. It was never a secret, though. I mentioned it casually a few times because the paperwork kept dragging on and people kept asking about it. Maria knew about it. She even knew roughly the amount because I had talked about maybe using it one day as a down payment on a small house somewhere outside the city. Until a few weeks ago, nothing felt obviously wrong. There were small things that annoyed me, but nothing that screamed major problem. Maria could be pretty sharp when she was irritated, and she often complained that my life was too predictable. She liked to joke that dating me felt like dating a spreadsheet. I usually ignored those comments because the mood would pass quickly. The moment things shifted happened on a random Tuesday night. Maria had fallen asleep on the couch while scrolling on her phone. The screen lit up with a message notification from a contact I recognized immediately. It was her ex. Normally, I respect privacy and would never open someone else's messages. But the preview text that appeared on the screen mentioned something that made me stop. It mentioned my inheritance. That was the moment I picked up the phone and opened the conversation. And what I read there completely changed how I saw the entire relationship in about 30 seconds. I did not read the entire conversation right away. At first, I only saw the most recent messages, and that was enough to tell me something was off. Her ex's name is Roger. I had heard the name before because Maria mentioned him a few times early in our relationship. According to her, they dated for about 2 years, and it ended badly. She always described him as immature and unreliable, which made me assume they had cut contact. Apparently, that was not true. The message that caught my attention was from Maria. It was sent earlier that evening. "I'm just waiting until he gets his inheritance money. Then I'll finally dump this boring loser and be with you." I read it 3 times because my brain honestly refused to process it the first time. Roger replied with something like "good plan" and a couple laughing emojis. Then he asked if I had any idea yet how much money was coming. Maria responded that I had no clue what was really going on. She wrote that I was predictable, easy to manage, and that she had already put up with me this long, so waiting a little longer was not a big deal. At that point, I locked the phone and just sat there for a minute. The strange thing is I did not feel explosive anger. It was more like a switch flipped in my head, and everything suddenly became very simple. 3 years together suddenly looked very different. A lot of small moments that used to seem harmless started lining up in a way that made much more sense. Maria pushing me to talk about the inheritance amount. Maria asking when the paperwork would finally be finished. Maria making jokes about how life would change once the money showed up. At the time, I assumed she was just excited for me. Now those conversations sounded completely different in my memory. I looked over at the couch. Maria was still asleep with the phone loosely in her hand. I could have woken her up right then and confronted her. That probably would have turned into a loud argument and a lot of denial. But the more I thought about it, the less interested I was in arguing. If Maria's plan was to wait until the inheritance arrived before leaving, then the situation actually gave me a very clear way to test something. Instead of confronting her, I decided to try a small experiment the next day. And the idea came to me in a way that was almost too convenient to ignore. The next morning, I went to work like normal, but my head was running through the situation the entire shift. I kept thinking about how Maria described me in those messages. Predictable, easy to manage. A boring loser she was temporarily tolerating for financial reasons. That kind of thing either triggers a huge emotional reaction or it makes things very clear. For me, it was the second one. If her entire plan depended on my inheritance arriving, then removing that expectation should immediately change her behavior. I did not need a complicated test. I just needed something believable. Around lunchtime, the idea formed fully. Instead of confronting Maria about the messages, I would create a situation where it looked like the inheritance had turned into a problem, something serious enough to make the money disappear. When I got home that evening, Maria was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling on her phone and complaining about a patient at the dental clinic who apparently argued about a cleaning bill. She greeted me normally. No tension, no guilt. If anything, she was in a good mood. That alone confirmed something for me. She clearly had no idea I had seen the messages. While she was in the shower later, I opened my laptop and typed up something that looked official. I copied the formatting style from a government notice and wrote a short document claiming there was a tax investigation involving the estate distribution. The idea was simple. According to the fake notice, the inheritance funds were frozen pending review by the IRS due to a filing discrepancy connected to my grandfather's assets. In other words, the money was suddenly not coming anytime soon. I printed the letter, folded it once, and left it on my desk where it would be impossible to miss. I did not say anything about it. The next morning, I went to work like usual and left the apartment before Maria woke up. I honestly expected some kind of conversation that evening. Maybe concern, maybe curiosity. Instead, what happened next was much more direct than I expected. I came home from work the next day expecting at least a conversation. Instead, I walked into a very strange atmosphere. Maria was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed and a tight expression on her face. She barely looked up when I walked in. Normally, she would start talking immediately about her day or complain about something from the clinic. That day, she just said hello in a flat voice. The fake IRS letter was gone from my desk, so she had definitely seen it. I asked if everything was okay. She shrugged and said she was just tired. The tone was noticeably colder than usual. Then she asked a question that told me everything I needed to know. She asked if I had heard anything new about the inheritance paperwork. I said no and mentioned that I found a strange letter on my desk that morning from the IRS about the estate being under review. I acted confused and a little annoyed, like it was just another bureaucratic delay. Maria did not react the way someone supportive normally would. She did not ask if I was worried. She did not ask if there was anything she could do. Instead, she immediately started asking very specific questions about whether the money might be delayed for months or even years. I said I honestly had no idea and that government investigations could take a long time. That answer seemed to change something in her mood instantly. The rest of the evening felt awkward. Maria barely spoke to me and spent most of the night on her phone in the bedroom. At one point, I heard her whispering during a call, but I could not hear the conversation clearly. By the time we went to sleep, the atmosphere felt completely different from the day before. But the real shift happened the following morning. I woke up early for my shift and noticed Maria was already awake. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a serious expression like she had been waiting for me. She said we needed to talk. The conversation that followed lasted maybe 15 minutes. And by the end of it, our 3-year relationship was suddenly over. Maria did not waste much time getting to the point. She started the conversation by saying she had been thinking a lot about our relationship lately and that things had started to feel stale. According to her, we had grown into very different people and she was not sure the relationship was healthy anymore. I listened without interrupting. The interesting part was how suddenly all of this appeared. 24 hours earlier, she had been completely normal. Now she was talking like someone delivering a carefully prepared speech. She said she felt like we were stuck in a routine that made her unhappy. She wanted more excitement in her life and felt like I was too predictable. Those were almost the exact same phrases she used in the messages to Roger. At that point, I already knew the real reason for the sudden breakup attempt, but I let her finish anyway. Eventually, she said she thought it would be best if we separated before things became more complicated. 3 years together, and the conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes. I asked a few calm questions just to see how she would respond. I asked if something specific had happened recently that made her feel this way. She said no. I asked if there was someone else involved. She immediately said absolutely not and looked slightly offended that I would even suggest it. The denial was almost impressive considering what I had read 2 nights earlier. Then she said something that made the whole situation even more obvious. She said she thought it would be healthier for both of us if we made the separation clean and quick so neither of us wasted more time. In other words, she wanted out immediately. I told her I understood, and that if she felt that strongly about it, there was not much point arguing. That response seemed to surprise her a little. I think she expected a fight or at least some attempt to convince her to stay. Instead, I simply asked when she planned to move her things out. Maria said she could stay with a friend for a while and started packing that same afternoon. By the time I got back from my shift the next evening, most of her stuff was already gone. The apartment felt noticeably quieter once Maria moved out. For the first couple days, I mostly focused on getting back into my normal routine. Work, gym, sleep. The breakup itself was strangely calm. No yelling. No dramatic arguments. Just a fast exit once the inheritance looked uncertain. That alone confirmed everything I needed to know. I never told Maria that I had read the messages between her and Roger. There did not seem to be any point. She had already made her decision based on the information she believed was true. The funny thing is that she actually seemed relieved during those last hours of packing. Like she had been waiting for the right moment to leave and finally felt free to do it. Before she left, she gave one final explanation about how we were simply incompatible long-term. Too different. Too predictable. The exact words again. After she drove away with the last of her boxes, I sat in the living room and thought about how cleanly everything had unfolded. If I had confronted her that night when I first saw the messages, the situation probably would have dragged out for weeks. Arguments, excuses, half apologies. Instead, the fake IRS notice accelerated her timeline immediately. She solved the problem for me. A few days later, I did something that in hindsight probably looks petty, but at the time it honestly felt like closure. The real inheritance paperwork finally came through that week. The estate had finished processing and the funds were officially transferred. The amount was enough for a down payment on a small house just outside the city. So I started looking. About 3 weeks later, I closed on a modest place in a quiet neighborhood in northern New Jersey. Nothing huge, but a solid house with a small yard and a garage. Once everything was finalized, I posted a simple photo on Instagram. Just the front of the house and the keys in my hand. The caption was short. Finally home. I did not tag anyone, and I did not write anything dramatic. But the reaction happened faster than I expected. Maria reacted to that Instagram post in less than an hour. At first, it was just a notification that she viewed the story. I did not think much about it, because people scroll through stories all the time. Then my phone started vibrating. The first message from her was simple. "Wait, you bought a house?" I did not reply. A few minutes later, another message appeared. "I thought you said the inheritance was tied up with the IRS." That one made me laugh a little, because technically I had never said the investigation was real. I had just acted confused about a letter. More messages started coming in. Maria asked when everything had been resolved and why I never told her the issue was fixed. She also asked how long I had been planning to buy the house. Again, I did not respond. About 20 minutes later, she tried calling. I let it ring. Then she called again. And again. Eventually, she sent a longer message explaining that she had been thinking about us a lot lately, and maybe we rushed the breakup. According to her, sometimes relationships go through phases, and maybe we should talk things through like adults. That was a pretty dramatic shift from the very confident speech she gave me about how incompatible we were. The timing was also interesting. For 3 weeks, there had been complete silence. No check-ins. No curiosity about how I was doing. Nothing. Then the second she saw the house photo, my phone suddenly became very important again. She called 4 more times that evening. The last voicemail she left sounded noticeably more anxious than the earlier messages. She asked if we could meet somewhere and talk, because she felt like there had been a misunderstanding between us. At that point, I was sitting in my new living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes listening to this whole thing unfold. And honestly, it confirmed exactly what I suspected the night I read those messages. So I blocked her. Phone, Instagram, everything. Just like that, the calls stopped. Blocking Maria solved most of the problem immediately. The calls stopped, and the messages stopped because they had nowhere to go. For a while, things went quiet again, and I figured that would probably be the end of it. But about 4 days later, something else happened. One evening, I got a message request on Instagram from an account I did not recognize. Normally, I ignore those, but the username looked oddly familiar. It was Roger. Apparently, Maria had told him about the situation, because his message opened in a very strange tone. He wrote that he thought it would be better if we talked man-to-man about what happened between me and Maria. According to him, there were a lot of misunderstandings, and he did not want unnecessary drama. I stared at the message for a minute because the irony was pretty impressive. 3 weeks earlier, they were literally laughing about how she planned to dump me after the inheritance money showed up. Now he suddenly wanted a calm conversation. Roger followed up with another message saying Maria was really upset and felt like I had intentionally misled her about the IRS situation. That part actually made me laugh out loud. I had never told Maria anything directly. I had left a piece of paper on my desk, and she filled in the rest herself. But Roger kept going. He said Maria felt like I manipulated the situation to trick her into leaving and that it was unfair because she might have made a different decision if she knew the inheritance was actually fine. Reading that sentence was almost surreal. The logic behind it basically suggested that if she had known the money was available, she might have stayed with me. Which, ironically, was exactly the problem in the first place. I thought about replying for a minute. Not to argue, just to point out the obvious flaw in that logic. But the more I looked at the conversation, the more pointless it seemed. So I blocked Roger too. 2 taps, and the entire situation disappeared again. After blocking Roger, the situation stayed quiet for a while. A couple weeks passed, and life settled into a normal rhythm again. I finished unpacking the house, got the garage organized, and slowly adjusted to the new routine. Owning a place instead of renting felt strange at first, but in a good way. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the front yard trimming some overgrown bushes when a car slowed down in front of the house. At first, I did not think much of it. People drive slowly through neighborhoods, all the time looking for addresses. But then the car stopped, and Maria stepped out. For a second, I honestly wondered how she even found the place. Then I remembered that she probably saw enough of the neighborhood in the Instagram story to figure it out. She walked up the driveway looking nervous but determined. I stayed where I was near the garage and waited to see what she would say. Maria immediately started talking about how hard the last few weeks had been for her. She said she had spent a lot of time thinking about everything and realized she might have made a huge mistake. According to her, she let stress and confusion affect her judgment. She said she regretted the breakup. She also said she never stopped caring about me. The speech sounded very rehearsed. What she did not mention even once was Roger. I listened quietly for about a minute while she explained how relationships sometimes go through rough patches and how maybe we should consider trying again. Then she looked around the property for a moment. She asked how long I had been living there. I told her about 2 weeks. She nodded slowly and said the house looked really nice. Then she said something that made the entire visit feel almost absurd. She said maybe the fresh start could be good for both of us. Like the house somehow reset everything. That was the moment I decided the conversation had gone on long enough. I told Maria the conversation was not necessary. She looked confused for a second and asked what I meant. So I explained it as clearly as possible. I said the relationship had already ended the day she decided to walk away. She made that choice very quickly and very confidently. I respected it at the time, and I still respected it now. Maria immediately tried to interrupt and said the situation had been more complicated than that. I shook my head and told her it really was not complicated at all. Then I said something she clearly did not expect me to know. I told her I had seen the messages she sent to Roger. The color drained from her face almost instantly. For a moment, she tried to deny it, but the attempt lasted maybe 3 seconds before she realized that strategy was pointless. She asked how I had seen them. I told her the truth. She fell asleep on the couch, and the message preview mentioned my inheritance. After that, I opened the conversation and read enough to understand the plan. Maria stood there silently for a few seconds. Then she said she was angry that I had set up the fake IRS letter to test her. I told her it was not really a test. It was just information. She decided what to do with that information. If the relationship actually mattered to her, a delay with the inheritance would not have changed anything. But it clearly did. Maria tried one more time to explain that she had been confused and that people make mistakes when they feel uncertain. I told her I agreed that people make mistakes. Then I said that leaving was not the mistake. Her real mistake was assuming I would still be standing there after she showed exactly why she stayed in the first place. That seemed to end the discussion. Maria stood there quietly for a moment, looked at the house again, then walked back to her car without saying anything else. I went back to trimming the bushes. And honestly, the whole situation left me with a very simple takeaway. If someone calls you predictable, sometimes the most useful thing you can do is behave exactly the way they expect, just not in the way they hoped.